This week on Jerusalem Dateline, a look back at the significant trends of 2019. Israeli leaders failed to form a government. Iran continued to threaten the Jewish state. Turkey invaded its neighbor, forcing Christians and other minorities to flee for their lives, while Israeli archaeologists uncovered biblical treasures. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. I'm joined this week by CBN Senior Editor John Waggy and CBN Middle East Correspondent Julie Stahl. 2019 was a significant year in so many ways, and here in Israel, it was marked by political paralysis. John, take us through some of the major political developments in the last year.
Well, to begin with, Chris, it started more than a year ago in the end of 2018 when Prime Minister Netanyahu decided he would have snap elections because it looked good for his Likud party, and he thought if we have them in April that it would work out well for him to build a governing majority so that he could keep on and become the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history. But there were a few roadblocks along the way, one of them being that his party fell behind a bit in the polls in March and ended up being almost in a tie but finishing ahead of the Blue and White Party, which was really organized to completely oppose him. On the way to a government, Netanyahu found that one of his key allies, Avigdor Lieberman, would not participate. That led to a paralysis that led to no government, and Netanyahu decided to call second elections, and those were held in September. The Likud party did worse there. Blue and White did slightly better. At the end of it all, neither Blue and White's Benny Gantz nor Benjamin Netanyahu were able to form a government, and that puts us in a situation where we're looking toward March of 2020 to see if the voters can do it a third time and come up with a 61-seat majority in the Knesset.
So this is historic. Never happened in Israel's modern history.
And I imagine Israelis never want it to happen again.
Yeah, I know. And Julie, another major development in 2019 was the Trump administration and the decisions they made towards Israel, one of the major ones recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And they also had a major announcement by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about Judea and Samaria.
He didn't go as far as recognizing Israeli sovereignty, but what he said was that the U.S. Doesn't believe that Israeli communities, Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, are illegal. In other words, they are more or less legal to be there. Right. And that was a big move. That's, the biblical heartland of Israel, basically. And hundreds of thousands of Israelis live there. So it was a big deal, both over the Golan Heights and over Judea and Samaria, to recognize.
And they actually, a lot of Israelis and Arabs live side by side in peace.
They absolutely do. They shop together, they work together, they fix each other's cars, they whatever, they live in a community life there, even if they're in separate communities. There are terror attacks there, but it's not everybody. There's a lot of community life between them there.
Yeah, and just after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's announcement, we went out there to Judea and had this report. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu celebrated the U.S. move by visiting Alon Shvut, a settlement about 15 miles from Jerusalem in the heart of Gush Etzion.
The Trump administration fixed a historic wrong, stood by truth and justice. I think it is a great day for the state of Israel and an achievement that will remain for decades.
I'm standing here in Gush Etzion, one of Israel's largest settlement blocks, known in the world as the West Bank, but in the Bible it's called Judea, part of Israel's biblical heartland.
Judea and Samaria are terms that were used in the Bible. We're talking about actual land that the Jewish people lived in, and the stories of Isaiah and the stories of Jeremiah, these stories happened in these lands.
Gush Etzion Regional Council head Shlomo Nieman says while Israelis don't need the world to agree on their biblical right to be here, he's happy with the historic decision.
For the number one player in the international arena to add this opinion, that, from our standpoint, is the right opinion, that Jewish settlement in the state of Israel, the land of Israel, in Judea and Samaria, is not against international law. This thing is a revolution.
Jews established farming communities here before Israel became a state in 1948, but were driven out during the War of Independence. After the victorious 67 Six-Day War, they returned to rebuild. Today, some 750,000 Israelis live in the region Palestinians want to establish their own state. Not everyone agrees with the new U.S. position.
Resolution 2334 states that Israeli settlement activities are a flagrant violation under international law.
The land of Palestine, and especially the lands within the 1967 border, is a pure Palestinian land. The occupation of this land is illegal.
But if Mayor Oded Revivi believes settlements actually foster peace.
President Trump is trying to bring us back to the time of the leaders who understood that the settlements, the Jewish towns and cities in Judea and Samaria, are not the obstacle for peace. They're rather the anchors which can create an example of how Jews and Arabs can live one alongside the other.
Shalev Kayam, CFO of the Gush Etzion Regional Council, goes even further.
The words of Isaiah of coming back in the vineyards and coming back and the land actually being uplifted is something that we've been waiting for thousands of years, and that's happening in our eyes. It's part of the redemption of the world.
Coming up, a look at Israel's #1 enemy and Turkey's invasion with tragic results. Well, one constant in 2019 was Iran's continued attempts to attack the Jewish state. A less visible weapon with dangerous potential is a network of attack tunnels running underneath the northern border. The IDF gave CBN News a rare look inside. This is Zarit, a small agricultural community of 250 residents on the Israel-Lebanon border. Above ground, it's quiet and peaceful, but underground, Hezbollah was planning for death and destruction. We're standing in the tunnel right now and just a few feet from the Lebanese border. This tunnel is called Ramia, named after the village where the tunnel began. It was the most difficult for the IDF to discover. It's also the longest and the deepest, the equivalent of a 22-story building built underground.
You can see the wind shear on the wall over there, electricity, communications, lighting, and there's a phone that was actually connected for the first day when we exposed the tunnel. The wire was still live. One of our guys jokingly picked it up and asked for anybody to answer on the other side. There was no answer.
The workmanship you see here is all done by Hezbollah. This tunnel took years to construct and millions of dollars to build, much of it supplied by Iran.
You can see the remains of a rail system that Hezbollah had in place, which is what they used in order to bring equipment up, basically, and also to take all of the debris and rocks and shift it out of the tunnel. This would attach to an electric drill, power drill, that would drill like this, and once it got to the end of the cup itself, they would just pull it out, knock the piece of rock off, and then shift that piece of rock back.
The size of this tunnel is impressive. It's large enough where hundreds of Hezbollah commandos could have come into Israel with the goal to kidnap or kill.
Where we're standing now, you can see behind me, is the last and the highest point that this Hezbollah tunnel got. As you can see, it's only a few meters from ground level.
This is the entrance Israel opened into the tunnel. IDF spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus told us the tunnel runs almost a mile long and was nearly operational.
Operational in the sense of Hezbollah actually having the ability to break out and then to run to the nearest Israeli community. There are two communities here nearby, less than 6 minutes running distance from where we are now.
Tunnel warfare expert Daphne Richmond Barak says the value of this type of warfare is priceless for Hezbollah.
The potential reward is a major one if only it succeeds, because it neutralizes the technological advantage of the Israeli army.
For now, Conricus believes they have found and rendered all the border tunnels useless, either by destroying or filling them with cement.
That doesn't mean that we have, even for 1 second, let down our guard and have stopped looking.
In the meantime, this massive tunnel represents the persistent determination of Hezbollah to destroy Israel and the IDF's vigilance to stop one of Israel's greatest enemies. One of the major tragedies of 2019 has to be the Turkish invasion of northeast Syria. The invasion forced hundreds of thousands of Syrians to flee, jeopardized the new democratic government, ethnically cleansed Christians and other ethnic groups, and created a geopolitical disaster. Here's just one of the stories we did on that major story this year. These jihadist troops fighting for Turkey just captured the Syrian town of Ras Al-Ain that had a large Christian population. Bassam Ishaq is the U.S. representative of the Syrian Democratic Council that represents a new democratic government in northeast Syria that speaks for all the peoples and minorities in that region. He told CBN's Faith Nation the jihadists stole the Christians' land.
They were told by the pro-Turkey rebels that they have orders not to kill the Christians, but you have no land here anymore. So they're not able to go and collect their harvest. And what this amounts to is really soft ethnic cleansing. Because if you lose your source of income, you lose your land, you leave. And so this is what the pro-Turkey jihadis are doing.
Those same jihadist forces are now on their way to the next town with a large Christian population, Tel Tamer.
We have, similar to ISIS, the same mindset as ISIS, those pro-Turkey jihadis who are coming in now threatening their town. We need the U.S. to step in.
On Tuesday, the U.S. House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly to sanction Turkey and sent the resolution to the Senate. Senator Lindsey Graham told CBN News they need to stop Turkish President Recep Erdogan.
I think these sanctions are necessary to make sure that Turkey does not ethnically cleanse Syria of Kurds. This is their ancestral home. They've been great allies to our brothers and sisters in the Christian faith. They helped us defeat ISIS, and we cannot sit on the sidelines and watch Turkey ethnically cleanse part of Syria from Kurds.
Retired Marine Captain Brandon Wheeler says the threat by these jihadist forces to Syrian Kurds and Christians represents a threat to the U.S.
A threat to freedom anywhere is a threat to freedom everywhere. And if you can't secure freedom here, you will be sure that people who want to kill Americans, who have killed Americans, will come here in order to man, train, equip, and prepare for the next war because they are committed.
Up next, a look at a new archaeological discovery they're calling the biblical Superhighway. Well, in 2019, Israel uncovered significant archaeological finds, many that prove the Bible, and perhaps none more significant than what is being revealed in the city of David. They call it the biblical Superhighway, the pilgrim's path that led to the Jewish temple in ancient times.
The places and events and the peoples that make Jerusalem, Jerusalem, for Christians, for Jews, it all happened here in the city of David. This is where the beating heart of Jerusalem is. We're talking about the Pool of Siloam. We're talking about Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. We're talking about the city of David. The pilgrimage road links them all together.
For Jews in ancient days, their pilgrimage began here at the Pool of Siloam. It's a mikveh or ritual bath. It's the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools. They would purify themselves here before going up to the Temple Mount to worship God.
The historian Josephus says that 2,000 years ago, on the pilgrimage festivals, there would have been more than 2 million people going up on pilgrimage. That's a lot of people who need to bathe.
The pool is also where Jesus healed the blind man, as recounted in the book of John. Its location was hidden by a road until 15 years ago, when a sewage leak led to excavations, the discovery of the pool, and much more.
The archaeologists, when they find the Pool of Siloam, so they understand if that's the pool, and they know where the temple stood on the Temple Mount some 2,000 years ago. The same Temple Mount is today.
Zev Orenstein with the City of David Foundation says archaeologists wondered how the pilgrims traveled from the pool to the Temple Mount.
So the archaeologists widened the excavation, and we are standing on the very answer to that question. We are standing atop the ancient pilgrimage road.
These are the stones that Jesus would have walked on his way up to the temple. And now the significance of the excavation of the pilgrimage road is that for the first time in 2,000 years, visitors will be able to walk all the way from the Pool of Siloam up to the Western Wall.
The word in the Bible, the Hebrew words, is aliyah l'regel, or ole regel. Now what we understand that to mean is it's a spiritual ascent. You're going up to the temple, going to Jerusalem. It's a very holy place. But Chris, when you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. Because as we're walking right now, and I'm sure you could feel it, we're walking uphill.
And it was more than that.
This would have been like Times Square. You would have had on both sides of the road, and keep in mind, the road is about 3, 4, 5 times wider than what we see over here. You would have had shops, stalls along both sides of the road. This is the center of Jerusalem from a spiritual perspective, from a communal perspective, also from a commerce perspective.
According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, the road took 10 years to build, from 20 to 30 AD, and was constructed by Pontius Pilate.
One of the major issues of Jerusalem is that it's a living city. All the layers, all the archaeological layers are built on top of one another, and the modern living quarters and everything is built on top of the archaeological layers.
Excavation manager Ari Levy says uncovering the road is a major engineering feat.
We have modern neighborhood just above our heads, and we don't want it to collapse. After each meter that we take out, each meter of soil, we enter an arch-like construction like this. This supports the entire weight of what we have above us.
Along the route, you can see many places where the road remains intact and others where it's destroyed, given its violent history.
We know that the Romans, they destroyed Jerusalem. And if you would find everything perfectly intact, well, it wouldn't seem like much of a destruction.
Among the discovered treasures are small coins minted during the Great Jewish Revolt, before the Romans destroyed the Temple and Jerusalem in 70 AD. Scholars often wonder why the Jews made worthless coins instead of weapons. Orenstein has the answer.
Jews of Jerusalem understood that the Romans were likely going to destroy the city. But they also believed that one day in the future, their descendants would return and find these coins, and they would know what their ancestors lived and died for a free Jerusalem. And here we are nearly 2,000 years later, standing along the very same pilgrimage road here in the city of David, in Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish state of Israel.
Half of the pilgrimage road will open soon to the public, and within a few years, all the way from the Pool of Siloam to the Western Wall. That will give visitors a first-hand experience of what it was like to worship God in the time of Jesus. Coming up, a look ahead to 2020 and what may be in store for Israel and the Middle East when we come back. John, Julie, 2019 was very significant in so many ways, archaeologically, politically, security-wise. John, take a look back at 2019 and then take us forward to 2020.
Chris, I think on the political international arena, there were a lot of things that maybe didn't get quite as much attention as the political infighting within Israel. But even as Prime Minister Netanyahu was going through 2 elections in 1 year and really battling for his legal standing in the community, he was defending the security of Israel. And Israelis really had the luxury this year of voting on other issues, among them Netanyahu himself, because he was providing such good security for the country. There were threats from Iran. Netanyahu and his military advisors struck at Iranian targets, Iran Revolutionary Guard targets in Syria. That was significant. He once again stood on behalf of the rest of the world against Iran, and particularly Israel, over and over and over again. And some people called that a political stunt, but he's been doing it for the entire 12 years. Another development that isn't getting as much attention as it should is the relations between Israel and the Muslim Arab world, where people see a mutual threat from Iran, and those ties, even if they're behind the scenes, are getting stronger and stronger with Saudi Arabia, the UAE. And Netanyahu also stood strong and threatening Iran in Lebanon and in Syria, of course, and in the Gulf states, and reacted particularly strongly when the Saudi oil facilities were bombed, and really not much was done by the United States or anyone in the aftermath. And Netanyahu's been telling the world, you better watch this and you better be prepared to do something about it.
What are some of the things you see looking forward to 2020?
The Iran threat's not going away. If anything, under these penalizing sanctions, they're going to be more apt to try and create trouble in the Middle East and even elsewhere. Also, the threat from Lebanon. Remember, we had protests in the streets in Beirut for the first time in years. We had protests in Iraq with more than 300 dead in 2019. These hotspots aren't going to become less hot in 2020. We're going to see people on the other side, the enemies, test Israel, test the U.S. to see if they can really avoid a war or if they can really stand for what they believe are their security interests.
Julie, how about you, looking back at 2019 and looking ahead to 2020?
Yeah, well, something we didn't mention really in this show is all the rockets that came from Gaza on Israel, and I think that was very significant. It was also, I think it was a year of kind of an instability or an uncertainty in Israel, and like John mentioned with Iran and everything, Netanyahu and other Israeli officials have made the point that Israel is actually the only one who's physically, militarily fighting Iran. That's going to continue in this coming year, and the uncertainty. Also, at least until we get and Israel gets a government, which hopefully will happen after this election, we don't know. I think, though, at times like this, that we can trust that God's also going to show up and He's working to do His purposes.
Yeah, and isn't that a great reminder for everyone to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, for the security of Israel, and the people here, as well as the peoples in the entire region? Yeah. Well, Julie, John, thanks for being with me and for this year, and look forward to next year. And thanks for being with us. I'm Chris Mitchell for John, Julie, everyone here in CBN News in Jerusalem. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next year on Jerusalem Dateline.